Well, as of mid-1995, I remember this, I'm talking about mid-19, a visitor to Yerevan could hear people say, the privileged class in our country is children. So now I want to talk about this idea that globalization improves the lot of children by reducing child labor. Okay, so during the final decades of the Soviet era, absenteeism from school was almost unheard of, except in rare cases in the countryside. And there was little or no non-farming child labor in Armenia. Well, that's the before picture. Two recent studies carried out with the help of UNICEF provide an after picture. So the reports describe declining quality of public education in Armenia, rapidly growing student absenteeism, and dropout rates closely linked to child labor. So, I mean, there's these really alarming statistics. For example, in 2002 to 2003, total dropouts increased by, well, I'm looking at like between 2002 and 2005, it looks like threefold in those 3 years, threefold increase of student absenteeism, and it's blamed on the fact that the fact that child labor has been increasing in the country. So Yerevansis, for example, didn't need to read this UNICEF report to discover that increasing numbers of children in Armenia have been working in family-run businesses. They've been working in markets and in the informal sector, selling trinkets on the street, accosting the tourists, you know, selling the little trinkets in front of the churches and so forth. And the children sell flowers and knickknacks on the streets of Yerevan. They work in urban trade and construction, and even, well, in mining. Although, you know, we don't want to make too much of that. And Yerevansis didn't need to read the UNICEF report to notice that increasing numbers of children are begging on the streets and dropping out of school to work, especially in agriculture. Reports indicate that children are trafficked to Russia too. This is a very painful and ugly, story to tell. But you know, there is the burgeoning human trafficking in children for purposes of both labor exploitation and sexual exploitation. Yeah, so after 16 years of capitalism, child labor, more than 16 years, but let's say 16 years of capitalism, child labor in Armenia has risen dramatically. So this does not fit. Clearly capitalism has not brought in improvement in child labor to Armenia. Let's take a look at improving the lot of women. Okay, now once I say that, this should be clear exactly where I'm going with this thing, so I'm going to be brief. Bhagwati claims that capitalism and globalization bring with them an improvement in the lives of women in poor countries. Well, Armenia is now a poor country, thanks to capitalism. So what has been the fate of women there in Armenia for 20 years? Well, we have the statistics. Single-parent households have proliferated. So has childhood malnutrition, suicide rates for women, suicide rates all around, especially for women, have burgeoned. Spousal abandonment, divorce, abortion rates, and domestic violence, they have all burdened. Economic globalization may have increased participation of women in the lowest paid job markets in Honduras, but it has drastically decreased the participation of women in the professions in Armenia. Unless we turn, and that is to say, unless we turn to the oldest profession in the world. And we know what's happened here. When I was in Armenia in the 1980s, people would point to this prostitute or this prostitute in the street and say, you see how the Soviet system, there's prostitution in the Soviet system. Yeah, there was prostitution in Armenia during the Soviet system. But prostitution was not an export industry of Armenia during the 70 years of the Soviet system. It took 10 years of capitalism in Armenia to produce prostitution as an export industry of the country. We're talking about hundreds of Armenian prostitutes in Istanbul. When we think of capitalism in Armenia, we can think of the pizza restaurants on Abovian Street. We can think of those new steel and glass high-rises in Yerevan. And we can also think of prostitutes in Istanbul. Capitalism, prostitutes in Istanbul. promoting representative democracy. Now, on this point, so supposedly globalization promotes representative democracy. Well, yeah, true. Multi-party elections have taken place in Armenia. They've been hotly contested. Two new administrations succeeded the Levon-Petrosyan administration. And as most of us are aware, representative democracy in Armenia is shaky at best. I'm not going to rehearse this stuff. We know about March 1st. We know about the repression before then. We shouldn't forget about it. By Levon-Petrosyan, violent suppression in '96 of demonstrators protesting against what they considered to be a stolen election. We know about both of these things. So the record of representative democracy in Armenia is shaky, but let's be charitable and say yes, representative democracy. That has been something of an achievement. But what's more important than that is the question of democracy in Armenia. That question is inextricable from the question of legitimation of class rule. Thus, the assessment of representative democracy in Armenia, you know what I mean by representative democracy? I mean elections every now and then, right? Within the context of capitalist class rule. The assessment of that representative democracy is connected to the crucial question of class formation in post-Soviet Armenia. It's connected in particular to the processes by which embryonic capitalists came to power in Armenia, how they coalesced into a class for itself in the run-up to the nominally independent statehood that we have now and in the years since. And it's connected to the transformation and replacement of state institutions by the capitalists and the lieutenants of capitalists. So this topic has been neglected for too long. It needs to be opened up, studied, and discussed. And I'd like to see maybe next year a panel devoted to class formation in Soviet Armenia, in particular formation of the capitalist class in Armenia. I'd like to see it. I would be interested in listening to such a panel. Okay, so we'll give them some credit when it comes to representative democracy. Give globalization a little bit of credit. Well, what about nurturing native cultures? What about nurturing native cultures? We know how angry Armenians used to get about the Russians, as they said, our blonde brothers, as people used to say cynically, facetiously, our blonde brothers. They would get angry. People had to learn Russian. Armenia, the Armenian state, the Second Republic, provided scholarships to diasporan Armenians to study at the State University and the Polytechnical Institute. And in the post-Soviet era, by contrast, native-born higher education subsidies have subsided. Those subsidies have subsided. The Soviet system provided subsidies for artists and writers, notably many of whom displayed their gratitude by joining the anti-Soviet demonstrations. It's interesting, if you go down the list of Karabakh committee members, how many of these people were mathematicians, historians, philologists, and so forth. They got free education. Once these people came to power, what did they do? They gutted higher education. In other words, they benefited from higher education in the Soviet system. Once they overthrew the Soviet system, they're going to make sure that nobody else can benefit from a state-subsidized higher education. How many of us have heard the comment that Yerevan used to be a country with perhaps more than its share of generous, courteous, honest, fair-minded, and tolerant people? How many of us have heard this? The free marketeers are proud to remind us, as they have so many times over the years, that there were always plenty of nasty Armenians during the Soviet period. And we all know that. There were plenty of nasty Armenians during the Soviet period. But now even our bard, our erstwhile anti-Soviet folk singer, even he publicly regrets his role in those demonstrations and his role in the demonstrations that led to the nominally independent Third Republic.